so much. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to have been invited, especially looking at the theme we're going to be focusing on today, rethinking education for girls and women beyond basic curricula. That for me is a very important theme because in my work in UNICEF, we do so much work running around and supporting countries that you don't have space or the opportunity to pause and say, what are you really doing? This education system which you are supporting, what is the knowledge? What are the values? What are the skills which are being imparted to the children? And how is it being done? Who is doing it? And is it beneficial or is it just routine? So I'm really delighted at this because to me this exchange will also benefit me to pause, think, and see how one can better serve children's rights. I come to you with a thesis which I want to put forward. My thesis is that yes, we have to rethink the education for girls and women. And we have to rethink it because if you look at the present curriculum, it is not transformative enough to really change the lives of girls and women for the better. It is not transformative enough for it to really address gender equality. That is my thesis. And we will go back to that when I am summarizing. Because what I'm really arguing is that if you look at the type of curriculum which we have in schools, it is very much, when we look at it from a gender perspective, it's very much grounded in what we were pushing forward in the 60s and 70s, which is a women in development approach, where when you send girls and women to schools, when you encourage women to go into literacy, you are really saying, how will these women and girls benefit the society? How will they benefit the development of a country? So that is the women and in development approach, which it is still very much prevalent in a lot of the programs and a lot of the curricula. It's always what benefits can we get from these women and from these girls to contribute to development. So that is very much alive, and it's a very much of an economic approach to educating women and girls, where the society looks at how the education of these girls, the education of these women can benefit the society at large. So that type of framework is still very much alive in the education system we have, and we can discuss a lot of research which has been done on that. There's a lot of evidence on that. What is also interesting is that another framework which we have used a lot in the way we analyze how to further develop countries is the gender and development approach. With the gender and development approach, what is interesting about it is that it is really working very hard to say the opportunities which were given to boys and men, why are they not also provided to women and to girls? So that equality of opportunity, that parity is very much the focus of the gender and development approach. And if you look at some of the curriculum which is weaving in the type of textbooks, is very much looking at gender parity. What about the girls? What about the girls? So that's an important part of it. My argument is that these two frameworks, they work in certain instances, but we use them indiscriminately, even when they are not relevant. And my argument is that we have to use much more transformative type of frameworks, like frameworks which focus on the identities of these children, the identities of these teachers. Because if you look at frameworks which look at identities, when you're developing the curriculum, for it to be relevant, you have to look at the rights of these girls, and to realize that a girl from a very affluent family, her needs are very different from a girl from a very, very poor neighborhood. And that the possibility of the girl from a very, very poor location surviving inside the system is much slimmer than that of a girl from an affluent neighborhood. So these identities are so important, and for us women so much more so, because as a woman, here I am, I'm not just somebody who is highly qualified in education. I am also a parent. I am also not just a parent and a mother. I am an aunt. I'm a mentor to somebody else. And the way I interact to different people reflects different identities. And that really impacts on how we are supposed to design the way the curriculum is supposed to be. And if you look at Southern Africa, for instance, where HIV/AIDS has had a huge impact in the lives of girls and boys, this is where we really need to use these theories of identities, because there you find that for every boy who is HIV positive between 14 and 24, there will be 6 girls who are HIV positive. So when you are designing a program like prevention, a program, you can't just say, let's design it for adolescents. It has to be adolescent girls and boys. And this adolescent, what language do they speak? From what ethnic group are they coming from? From what, is it rural or urban? All these issues have to be taken into account. So my argument is that this using of the identity approaches to also look at social norms, cultural practices like early marriage, cultural practices which make masculinity to be dependent on being macho. So if you are a boy and you are really a boy who is to be respected by other boys, you must appear as macho as possible. And that is very much dominant in the research which I've done in Eastern and Southern Africa, where you find that this machismo is very much linked to social norms, cultural practices. So then, when you have that type of a culture, and you're supposed to have a curriculum which is focusing on prevention of violence, prevention of HIV/AIDS, you have to look at this masculinity and how you're going to address these issues. You have to look at these femininities, because girls, it was very clear when we were doing the research that the girls, they were, most of them were living up to the norm that they are submissive, that they should always be behind the boys. So they were living up to that norm. But what was exciting, some of the girls, because of the mentorship they were getting from teachers, from their aunts, and even from some of the male members in church, that value system, that self-esteem was such that they said, we are rejecting this social norm that we are always to be behind men. We are always having to lack confidence around them. That the only relationship with men has to be of a sexual nature, not just a pure friendship as human beings. So then, so that for me was really very heartening when we are using this identity framework, because it shows that there is resistance to the social norm, and you can take that opportunity, or where there is resistance, to transform the gender relations and provide girls and women a better opportunity. And I've seen some faith-based organizations encouraging men and women, girls and boys, to be in forums where they engage and discuss issues like family planning. They engage on issues like sexuality. They even engage on issues like dress. I attended one forum in South Africa in church where the discussion was women should not wear miniskirts. That was the discussion. And what was interesting, the women and men were there and they were engaging. And at the end of the discussion, it became very clear that, but why should the men dictate what women should wear? Who decides who wears white? And why shouldn't the women comment on how men are dressing? So by the end of that discussion, you could see there is some understanding, there is some compromise. And that for me was really powerful. Another framework which UNICEF for the last 10 years has used very, very strongly in order to really reform the curriculum, to reform governance of schools, and to reform relations with the community is what we call child-friendly schools. So when we approach quality education as UNICEF, we say that fine, learning is very important. Teachers are very, very important. You can't have quality without learning, without the curriculum. But without water and sanitation, that school will not really survive. No child will learn. If a child comes hungry to school and there's no school feeding program, that child will not learn. If that child has got worms in the stomach and you have not organized a de-worming program in a school, that child will not learn, because no matter what they eat, there's this foreign thing which is also eating the kids' food. So then, in other words, you have to provide services so that the school ensures that the children learn, because there's water and sanitation, because when necessary there is school feeding. So there is a kind of a holistic approach to learning. What is even more important is the value system. How valuable is the school to the community? How valuable is the community to the school? I remember Nelson Mandela in South Africa. He narrated a story of he would get huge contributions from donors outside South Africa for him to construct schools. And then he got those donations after he retired. So he decided that the Eastern Cape, where he comes from, a very poor area, even now it's a very poor area, that's where schools will be constructed. But the people who he gave responsibility to construct the schools, they constructed beautiful schools. When they opened, children were not going into those schools. So then he began to ask, but why are children not making use of schools? And that's how UNICEF got involved. And it came out that the parents, the community, the chiefs around the villages had no ownership of the school. Some of them were saying, if you had consulted us, we would not even have had the school where you put it. We would have preferred it in this other area because of distance, or because this particular land, we view it as a holy place which we don't want anybody to build anything on. So the community involvement. so that there is ownership. That is one area of this child-friendly school which we think is extremely important. Involve the community and understand the values of the community so that they can engage with the school. A good example was in Kenya, in a well-off area. Some kids girls used to be raped when they left school. And then the same as in a slum area. So one of my friends, who is still a professor at Nairobi University, did this research. Why? She found that the rape rates had really dropped in the slum, Kabira. But in this middle class school, the rape rates have increased. And when she researched, she found that in this slum school, the school engaged the community. The community were the ones who were responsible for the safety and security of the children. And everybody in that community knew that if anything happened to that child, they are going to answer to the whole community, not just to that child. And as a result, those kids, those girls were much, much safer in that school than in that well-off school. So then it goes back again to the value system and the type of ethics which need to be thought of not just by the school, but by the community, but also the national government. What is the role of the government in those type of areas? And I'll finish off by also giving an example that one of the principles in these child-friendly schools based on the CRC is democratic participation. And by democratic participation, we're talking about participation of the community, participation of the children themselves, of the girls themselves. And that is why in the last 10 years, you find that all over the world, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, UNICEF has encouraged girls and boys together or separately to really have clubs and to develop movements to push issues which they feel strongly about. And that type of democratic participation, one of the things it does, like for instance what we saw in a good example in South Africa, in one of the most poor provinces in Limpopo, they found the boys were very worried that their friends who are adolescent girls were dropping out of school because the school did not have proper toilets for girls. And girls who have reached puberty, water and sanitation is extremely important. Otherwise they drop out. And that has been shown time and again all over the world. So what did these boys do? They decided their boys' movement is going to build toilets for the girls in the schools which are part of that movement. So they're the ones who began to raise funds with the private sector, who worked with the parents, and they managed to construct school toilets for girls. And to me, that's a beautiful example of building friendship between girls and boys, instead of making them always to be clashing between each other. And that for me is the message of gender equality. Gender equality does not just mean girls and women alone, it also means boys and men working together as human beings and identifying the areas where there are barriers and addressing those areas. Like right now in education, all of you I'm sure are aware that in the Caribbean is the boys who are lagging behind, not the girls. But at the same time, the girls who are interacting with these boys are confronted with a lot of violence in the school, out of the school. But in terms of performance, they're lagging behind. So what does this tell us about the value system, about the knowledge, about the skills? Thank you very much.